An extra good evening. I'm Eric Elkin.
And I'm Stephanie Valle. Tonight, Election Day is our topic, and it's just 16 days away on Tuesday, November 8th. And early voting begins tomorrow, October 24th, and runs through Friday, November 4th.
Now, there's a lot on the ballot, including the high-profile Texas race for governor, but El Pasoans will also be asked if they support a nearly $273 million community progress bond. That bond is broken up into three propositions. The first is Proposition A, which is focused on streets infrastructure. This is what it will read on your ballot. Quote, the issuance of $246,480,000 general obligation bonds for street improvements, including sidewalks, streetscapes, and traffic controls and planning, and the imposition of a tax sufficient to pay the principal of and interest on the bonds. Now, if you want it to pass, you vote for. If you don't support it, you vote against.
Proposition B is focused on parks and recreation facilities. The ballot item will read the issuance of $20,800,000 of general obligation bonds for parks and recreation facilities and the imposition of a tax sufficient to pay the principal of and interest on the bonds. A vote for means you want it to pass. A vote against means you don't want it to pass.
And Proposition C is described by the city as the Climate Action Plan. It will read on your ballot the issuance of $5.2 million general obligation bonds for renewable energy and resource use efficiency improvements and planning, and the imposition of a tax sufficient to pay the principal of and interest on the bonds. Again, a vote for means you support it. A vote against means you don't want it to pass.
Tonight, we're going to spend the majority of ABC-7 Extra focusing on Proposition A because it makes up about 90% of the money the city is asking for. This is elpasotexas.gov/progress. It lays out the community progress bond. If we focus on Proposition A, you can see the breakdown of where the money would be spent. It also includes a link to view El Paso's 50 most traveled arterial roadways in need of resurfacing or reconstruction. In fact, if you open that up, it will show you the grid here of all of those roads. And there is also what's called a PCI scale, and it will look like this when you open it up on your computer or your phone, and it rates a road's condition on a 0 to 100 scale, 0 being the worst, 100 the best. Now, you can even zoom in on any area that you want to see so you can find your neighborhood or the streets that you use most often to see how those roads grade.
Again, tonight we'll focus mostly on Proposition A and how it could impact the taxes you pay over the next 10 years. Before we hear from the city, ABC-7's Drew Cosgray hit the streets to see how El Pasoans feel heading into the election.
The cars that you see are driving behind me are driving on the most damaged street in El Paso, Sunland Park. Lee Trevino is also in the top 3. We talked to residents in the area about how they felt about the bond that is being put forth towards the city, about putting 90% of the funds in that bond towards street repairs.
We need to fix it.
I do see a big increase in those taxes and there's no end in sight.
2 flat tires in less than a month, it's pretty expensive.
This weather, I already have like 3 times repair my car.
Yeah.
I expend more than $300.
We would have to look at it. I'm not sure how that would affect our taxes. I'm sure we do pay enough taxes already, but it depends on the increase we would have, maybe.
Time is change, money change, economy change. It doesn't matter. We need the streets.
I'm not necessarily gonna go completely against it, but maybe the amounts and the percentage might be a place where I would like to know more information.
I guess if it's a minimal cost and if we really see a change with that increase in taxes, maybe I would be voting for it.
No matter which side you're on when it comes to this bond, you can go get your voice heard on Election Day. Reporting from West El Paso, Drew Cosgray, ABC-7.
Joined now by 2 guests from the city of El Paso, Yvette Hernandez, city engineer, as well as Robert Cortinez, the CFO of the city of El Paso. Thank you both for coming in tonight to talk specifically right now about Proposition A that'll be on the ballot come November, specific to streets. This is a lot of money that the city is asking for. From an infrastructure standpoint, I think a lot of people, they hit the roads, they drive in the city of El Paso, they know that there is a need there when it comes to some of the road conditions that they're driving on, but it's a lot of money that's being asked for. What is the infrastructure need?
Right. So we understand from the community in the feedback that we did earlier this year that is their preference of investing into our infrastructure. But if we also look at dollars and cents, right now council has approved $10 million towards both our residential and our collectors. What we need annually is $44 million. So we see there's a differential there, and there's a need to upkeep our streets.
Robert, this is something that obviously will get a lot of people frustrated, upset, asking for more money. Property taxes are already very high in the city. This is something that they say, I've seen a lot of the comments, even in the Facebook posts, about the community outreach programs that you have held so far, saying that the city has a budget of about $1 billion. How can you not be able to pay for streets and infrastructure with that money as it is? So from a financial standpoint, why is there such a great need, financially speaking, in addition to what you already get?
Thanks, again, Eric, for that question and having us tonight to be able to answer some of these questions. So as Yvette just mentioned, one of the big things that we've been doing over the last 8 years is playing a lot of catch-up, really trying to make up for a lot of deferred maintenance and a lot of neglect throughout the city, whether it's streets, public safety, our parks and museums. And so as Yvette mentioned, it's only been within the last 5 years that the council started allocating money towards doing residential street projects. And so within the budget now, we have $10 million for residential and collector roads. So that's PAYGO money, that's annual money in the budget. Prior to 5 years ago, the city had $0 in the annual budget to do those type of projects. And so beginning to shift away from having to utilize debt and finance a lot of these projects and utilize this cash. However, you can't go from 0 to 100 overnight. And so it's been an incremental shift toward utilizing this annual funding. However, as Yvette mentioned, and as you're talking about, there's still a lot of need and a lot of neglect that we're still having to play a lot of catch up on. And so utilizing this bond funding to really help continue the momentum that we've made on some of our street programs and continue to funding the number one priority that we've heard loud and clear from the community.
Viewers may hear that and be frustrated, though, to hear that just five plus years ago, the money wasn't being allocated there, and now it feels like something that maybe to them we didn't foresee coming until we hit the point where we need it desperately.
Right, and really that's the reason for the bond, is that the 2012 Street CIP, which the council approved, use of certificates of obligation, all of those bonds have been sold, so those funds are running out. And so we have a small number of projects left to complete. However, we need to continue the momentum, as I mentioned, because if we don't continue to move forward and invest in the streets, we're only kicking the can down the road, and things are only going to get even worse than what they are now.
Speaking of, there's a pretty elaborate presentation on the City of El Paso's website for this community progress bond. You can really go street by street wherever you live across the city. There's this scale from 0 to 100. The closer to 0 you are, the road is in dire need. The closer to 100 you are, of course, it is in pretty good shape. But you can really scour the city and see the different oranges and reds that indicates real need of repair. Take us through a little bit about what the need is in the city as it pertains to that in particular, and what people can see and really look at maybe where they live, what their commute is, and what the roads that they're traveling on are like in terms of the condition.
You touched on really great points. So we've been communicating to the community. We've been holding meetings in all of the districts to really educate about the 3 different propositions. And looking at the website, it shows you can actually look at your PCI, and that tells you the condition of each of the pavements, like you made mention, on a scale from 0 to 100. And it's really a data-driven process. We made sure to select the arterials, the top 50, those that are most traveled. So those are the ones you take to work, you go to visit friends, family, you will see the investment on the streets that you most travel. But also to bear in mind, with residential, we have about 6,000 streets, 5,000 of which are residential. So there's a lot of infrastructure that the city is maintaining. So the question is, when are you going to get to mine next? So we are doing our due diligence to make sure that we select it based on criteria. So the condition of the pavement, also coordinating with our utilities, and looking at neighborhood blocks, so geography. If we're doing one street and we're mobilizing the contractor, does it make sense to do that entire area within the neighborhood?
Speaking of when are you going to get to mine next, I'm sure passing this bond would go a long way in being able to do that, because obviously you need the funds to do that. On that website, there is a portion about tax impact. What is this going to cost me? That is something that is top of mind for El Pasoans who will be heading to the polls voting for this. You've laid it out that it's about $5 per month, which comes out to about $60 a year, which is for the average home. I'm assuming that's about a $180,000 home?
165.
165. Okay. So for anyone who has a more expensive home, obviously that's going to be more money than that. And it says that that will be the cost initially, based on current assumptions. It'll be less in the beginning, more later on. Can you pinpoint a little bit more about what the overall tax impact will be to El Pasoans, and for how long are we talking?
And so in that presentation, it talks about the potential, right, of what that potential impact is going to look like. In the beginning, a few years, it's a 10-year rollout. In the beginning years, it's a very, very minimal impact. Starts at about $2 a month, so pretty minimal. Continues to gradually increase until we get to about that $5 average, right, over the first 10 years of the program. Again, a lot of assumptions built into that. It's a very conservative estimate as well. I anticipate that being much less. However, again, we have to be very conservative and not try to paint an unrealistic picture of what it's going to look like from now and over the next 10 years. So we're looking at things such as future interest rates, the timing of when the cash is going to be needed to fund these projects if it passes. We have potential refinancing of old debt potentially in the future, which is not incorporated into that estimate. And so that's something that could potentially help bring down that estimated amount. So again, a lot of assumptions, but again, a very, very conservative, very realistic assumption about what that potential impact can be.
So you're not thinking it's going to go too much higher than that $5 a month impact? You're conservative because obviously what we're going through right now with the current inflation,
Correct.
but just about a year and a half ago, you were able to refinance so many projects at such low interest rates. So there is the hope that at some time within the next 10 years,
Correct.
you could take advantage of another opportunity like that.
Right, so we have higher interest rates built into the outer years. Again, a lot of it's being driven by the cash flow as well. Our budget office, comptroller's office, engineering department work very closely together to ensure that we're only issuing debt as we need it to fund these projects. And so, again, a lot of assumptions built in, but again, that's our conservative estimate on the impact.
All right, so let me play a scenario out here. El Pasoans want better streets. I don't think that's a secret to anyone. They don't necessarily want their taxes to go up more, though. So they go to the polls, they say no to this, they strike it down, then what happens?
There's a few different alternatives and some of the different things that we've talked about with the City Council. And so within the Proposition A, Yvette talked about the top 50 streets that were identified, the most traveled. And so if this bond doesn't pass, the City Council would not be able to utilize certificates of obligations for 3 years on those projects. And so we'd have to identify an alternative source of funding to continue providing street repairs, because obviously this problem isn't going to go away. And so there's different types of fees that other cities have that City of El Paso does not have. And so we would just go back and have to identify some alternatives as to how we can continue investing in our streets.
And so ultimately, there are some people whose street may have been resurfaced, that they want resurfaced, that ultimately doesn't get resurfaced, or at least not for many more years to come. That is something also that I want to ask about. So you're talking about a 10-year window here. So ultimately, if people are going to the polls and they vote to approve this and this ultimately passes, they can expect sometime within a 10-year window that maybe the roads that they travel, and obviously, again, the ones that are more towards that zero are going to be pushed up front towards the front of this project. But somewhere in that 10-year window is what we're looking at?
Yes, and we have a process as well. So every 2 years, the residential streets will be brought before council and they will be voted upon. So everyone will know there's a transparent process of which roads will be selected and done in those 2-year basis.
What about for people who say that this should have, there should be a way to find out how to get this done without another $272 million worth of a bond, that with the money that you already get from property taxes, you should be able to figure out a way to get the streets repaired, resurfaced, redone completely, whether, depending on what is needed. What about people who say, figure out a way to do it without asking us for more money?
So I've done several of your shows, and the number one driver of the city's budget is our public safety departments, our police and fire. And so when I talked about catching up on a lot of deferred areas, a lot of neglect over decades, if we're talking 40, 50 years of neglect and deferred maintenance, investment in our police department. We're just now at the level of our police staffing that we were 20 years ago. And that's only because we've implemented these multiple academies, tried to get caught up on our police staffing. It's the number one driver of our budget. 60% of the city's general fund budget is our police and fire departments. And then when we look at the rest of it, if you look at it from a different perspective, we talk about people say, reduce the budget, cut the budget. 3/4 of the city's budget is people. It's our workforce. So these are the people out providing the services to the community. And so it's a difficult discussion when we're talking about, find a way to reduce the budget and not impact, people's lives at the same time. And so the city is very considerate of that. We invest heavily in our workforce. This is an area, as I mentioned, that we've continued to invest in. The City Council, again, has been very proactive in investing that $10 million a year in the streets, utilizing that PAYGO funding. However, like I said, you can't go from 0 to 100 overnight. It's going to take a little bit of time for us to continue to build upon that annual funding and then ultimately minimize use of the debt to do some of these projects. But these projects, just one more point, these projects that we're talking about, resurfacing, there's also reconstruction projects built in. Reconstruction projects are very, very expensive. If Yvette can chime in and talk a little bit more about that. But for example, the Schuster reconstruction project, that's a project that I believe is about a $13 million project.
Yes, sir.
For a small stretch of road, for one project, you're talking about one street is a $13 million investment in our community. And so, I mean, we talk about the wide ranging, Yvette talked about 6,000 roads. Some of those roads are going to be much more expensive than the others.
And ultimately, we're running short on time here, but I do want to ask this as well. If this were to be struck down and you don't get the bond approved, ultimately, come budget season, next summer again, in order to do some of the work that you want to do, that's, I would imagine, would be factored into budget season and could contribute to a tax rate increase as well, in order to get the money that you need, right?
Potentially. I mean, like I said, we would review all potential options just to continue investing in our streets. We know, like I said, the problem is not going away. It's not going to get better without continuing to invest in it. So absolutely, we'll have to come up with some alternatives as to how we continue investing in our streets.
All right. Robert Cortines, Yvette Hernandez, thank you so much for coming in tonight on ABC-7 Extra.
Thank you.
You're watching ABC-7 Extra. Still ahead, we hear from the head of one group asking you to vote against the bond, why they don't support it, and their solution to fixing the streets without the extra tax money.
I'm Mark Ronchetti, and I approve this message.
Tonight, New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham is battling a sexual misconduct allegation.
The governor mocked the manhood of an openly gay staffer.
And then grabbed his crotch through his clothes.
I was pressured to not report it to law enforcement.
The governor paid the staffer more than $150,000 to settle and forced him to agree to never talk about it again. Wouldn't this get you fired?
Michelle Lujan Grisham let hundreds of criminals out of prison early, including career criminal Chris Beltran. Beltran violated probation. Then Lujan Grisham's administration released him early again, despite his repeated death threats to his ex-girlfriend from prison. Days after his early release, he hunted his ex-girlfriend down and murdered her. Michelle Lujan Grisham is failing to keep us safe. Paid for and authorized by RGA New Mexico 2022 PAC.
Save on Santa Fe today at Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso. We are overloaded with Santa Fe's in stock right now. You heard right. A huge inventory is available today on our lot. All new 2023 Santa Fe's for $289 a month or 0 down or 1.9% APR for well-qualified buyers. Save on Santa Fe. Backed with a 10-year warranty, 10-inch touchscreen, Apple CarPlay, wireless device charging, and so much more. All for $289 a month or 1.9% APR. Save on Santa Fe today at Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso.
It's a parent's worst nightmare. My son Diego was murdered. The county released the gunman on bond. He violated it 37 times, then shot another person. Why did the county even let my son's murderer out of jail? Beto O'Rourke favors easy bail. Just release criminals back on the streets. That's the same policy that let my son's killer run free. If Beto O'Rourke is elected governor, there'll be more violence and more victims.
Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra Sunday. I'm Stephanie Valle. Tonight's topic is the City of El Paso's Community Progress Bond proposal. The city is asking for you to approve $272 million in bonds. Much of that money will go towards repair and improvement of streets and parks. Election day is November 8th. Now, before the break, we heard from the city about why this bond is necessary. I'm joined now with a counterpoint. Dave Marino is the chair of the El Paso County Libertarian Party. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
So what are your thoughts on the bond?
Well, my biggest thing is I think we're asking the wrong question, for one. The answer is obvious. We need better roads. We need better streets. But the question is why is this not already in our municipal government's budget? So they currently have $80 million budgeted for streets and maintenance, but $245 million, I think, is what they're asking for streets and maintenance in this bond. And I don't see why it's not already in the budget.
Now, the city did say that they just had been putting off repairs, and now it's come to a point where it needs to be done. If they don't pass this bond, we'll see a tax increase regardless in forms of a tax increase, a property tax increase. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the bond itself has language that says we're going to get a property tax increase. But in the case with these bonds, is it's debt that's issued. So then we end up having to pay interest on that debt. So we're already paying $128 million in debt servicing on our current budget, which is $1.16 billion is El Paso's current city budget. And if you want to read it, it's only 895 pages long.
So, I mean, you said it earlier, you know there's a problem. You drove on the streets to get here. What would be your solution if not to have a tax increase in some form to pay for the streets?
I think we need to deny this bond, and we need to force our representatives to get into the budget book and find the money within the budget in order to make these streets better. This is where it should have been the whole time. The basic responsibilities for municipal government should be public safety, paying for government, libraries, and streets and roads and parks.
If there was a place where you would take the money from, would you offer a solution to that? Because I'm pretty sure they would say that they've done that.
There's 895 pages that they could look through to find the $246 million. But they're right, though. I mean, why did we wait for it to get this bad? You know, where we have to try to borrow $246 million at a time now where interest rates are going up and inflation, which means that you know, material to fix the roads is going to be more expensive. And you know, so basically the cost of these bonds is going to be doubled what it was just a year or two ago. So I mean, it's even more expensive now, and yet they want to borrow the money. This should have been fixed. It should have been in the budget 10 years ago. But at some point we have to draw the line. We can't just keep handing our city representatives this blank credit card and saying, hey, just run it up as much as you want. You know, when they were building water parks and a ballpark and stuff that's, you know, insolvent. It's not making us any money. It's costing us money out of our budget every year. They're increasing property taxes to pay for quality of life things. Well, quality of life is putting money back in the pockets of El Pasoans, not raising our property taxes. You know, when you're not taking care of your basic responsibility as a municipal government, you know, yet you're going to go build water parks and stuff like that.
So you would urge people to vote against this bond?
Absolutely, absolutely, and all three of them. I mean, the only one that isn't a basic responsibility of municipal government is the climate part of the bond, but I still would decline it because climate change needs to be addressed once we address the fact that El Pasoans are tired of paying property taxes, or the property taxes continuing to go up. You know, we have the lowest median income in the state of Texas, and yet we have one of the highest property tax rates. That's not right. We have a city manager that makes 10 times the median income of our average El Pasoan. There's something wrong in El Paso city politics.
Dave Marino, who's chair of the Libertarian Party here in El Paso County, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Stephanie. There are 3 sections of the Community Progress Bond, as we mentioned off the top. Next on ABC-7 Extra, the opportunity that El Paso could become eligible for if the 3rd section of the bond passes. Those details after the break. You're watching ABC-7 Extra.
You know, one of the biggest fears that we see from so many folks is, have we done a good enough job financially as we go on through the retirement years? I think retirement should look like, it should look like every day being a Saturday. We want to have freedom to go do the things that we can do, and we're going to help you understand the tools that will help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. What I get out of that is such an incredible fulfillment of being able to help you get to where you want to be.
Catherine Parker will uphold our Texas values. A successful businesswoman and rancher, Catherine Parker will stop rising inflation and lower our cost of living. Catherine Parker will secure our border communities and fund border security. Catherine Parker will stand with law enforcement and against the radicals who want to defund our police, because our communities deserve to be safe. And Catherine Parker will defend the oil and gas jobs that power our communities. Truth, freedom, prosperity. Catherine Parker for State House.
To be successful in a 21st century economy, our community needs a radical change to how and what we learn. At Fab Lab, our mission is to teach El Paso's youth competitive core skills like coding. With support from El Paso Electric's Community Partner Program, we've been able to develop our electric code course and take it out to area schools. This places students at the front line of innovation and empowers them to succeed in a tech-driven economy. With El Paso Electric's help, we're rewriting education one line of code at a time.
Politician Yvette Harrell and her friends are straight up lying about me. Surprised? I'm not. They're trying to hide her record, and they don't want you to know the truth about mine. So here's both. I voted to increase the Las Cruces police budget by millions.
But Yvette Harrell protected the rioters that attacked our capital instead of the 5 police officers that died after protecting her.
So Yvette, who really supports the police? I'm Gabe Vasquez, and I approve this message.
Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. I'm Eric Elkin.
And I'm Stephanie Valle. For most of this Extra, we've been focusing on Proposition A, which asks you if you support nearly $250 million to be used towards repairing El Paso's streets and sidewalks.
As we mentioned, Proposition B asks for a little more than $20 million for parks and recreation facilities. Meanwhile, Proposition C is for a little more than $5 million for a climate action plan.
But what exactly does that entail? The city says the money would cover the cost to create more green spaces and increase tree canopy throughout El Paso. It would also increase the number of bike paths and pedestrian walkways, and more electric vehicle charging stations would be installed throughout the city.
The city says approval of Proposition C would also create financial incentives for homeowners who use solar energy. But a chunk of that $5 million would also give El Paso access to something else.
20% of that will be used for a feasibility plan. And that is really important in order to leverage city dollars. Once you have a plan in place, then you're able to go after state and federal funding. And currently, the city of El Paso does not have that. So it really diminishes our opportunity to fund some of the programs that we need to alleviate the environmental stressors.
And again, Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. Early voting begins tomorrow and runs through Friday, November 4th.
It's your voice, your vote, and you can find our complete election coverage on kvia.com. Just click on the Your Voice, Your Vote section. We have links to the issues, candidate forums, voting location information, as well as a link to the Community Progress Bond presentation we just discussed tonight.
And of course, you can count on ABC-7 to bring you team coverage on election night. In the meantime, thank you for joining us tonight. For Stephanie Valle, I'm Eric Elkin. This has been ABC-7 Extra.